The human body is a fragile thing. You spend your whole life thinking you're invincible, that the bad stuff happens to other people. Then one Tuesday you're reaching for a bag of frozen peas in the grocery store, and your chest explodes. Not metaphorically. It felt like someone had reached into my ribcage with a red-hot claw hammer and was going to town on my sternum. I woke up 3 days later at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. At least that's what the nurses told me. I don't remember much except a fog of morphine and the incessant rhythmic beeping of machines. I was in the cardiac intensive care unit. A triple bypass. They'd cracked me open like a lobster, patched up the plumbing, and now I was tethered to the wall by a dozen tubes and wires. The most important of those was the machine humming softly beside my bed. A balloon pump threaded through an artery in my groin up into my aorta, helping my weakened heart circulate blood. If that machine stopped, even for a few minutes, the doctor said the odds of a major clot or cardiac arrest went up astronomically. My name is David Chen. I'm a high school history teacher, not a guy who expects a lot of drama. But drama, as it turned out, had other plans for me. It came in the form of a 62-year-old woman with a severe blonde helmet haircut and an obsession with ficus trees. Her name was Patricia Winthrop, and she was the president of the Vista del Sol Homeowners Association. The first I heard of Patricia was from my wife, Lena. Lena had been my rock, sleeping on a terrible pull-out chair in my room for a week. One afternoon she looked more exhausted than usual. "There's a woman outside," she said, rubbing her temples. "From the HOA. Says she needs to talk to you about the trees." I blinked, the morphine making everything fuzzy. "Trees? What trees?" "We live in a condo. We have a balcony with 2 potted succulents. That's the thing. One of them died while you were in surgery. I was a little busy, praying you wouldn't die, so I forgot to water it. The HOA sent a violation notice. Now she's here in person demanding we remove the dead plant because it's an eyesore and is negatively impacting community aesthetic standards." I almost laughed, but it hurt too much. "Tell her to go away." Lena tried. She went out to the waiting area. Through the thin walls of the ICU pod, I heard the muffled sound of voices escalating. Lena came back in, her face pale. "She's threatening to fine us $200 a day until it's removed. She says she has the right to enter the property to abate the nuisance, if we don't handle it." The stress alone probably spiked my blood pressure. A nurse came in and gently but firmly asked Lena to keep the noise down. Patricia Winthrop had been escorted out by hospital security, but it was clear she was just getting started. Over the next 2 weeks, the situation escalated from absurd to terrifying. The fines piled up. Then came the certified letters threatening legal action and a lien on our condo. I was in no condition to deal with it. Lena, running on fumes and caffeine, tried to explain the situation. Bypass surgery, ICU, life support, to Patricia over the phone. Patricia's response, as Lena later recounted it with tears in her eyes, was, "Medical issues are not an excuse for violating the CC&RS. The rules apply to everyone. If you can't maintain the property, you shouldn't own it." She was a monster disguised as a community volunteer. Patricia Winthrop saw herself as the guardian of Vista del Sol. In reality she was its tyrant. She had nothing else in her life. Her kids were gone, her husband had left her years ago, and the HOA was her kingdom. She ruled it with an iron fist, fining people for grass that was a quarter-inch too long, for painting their front doors the wrong shade of beige, for having guests park in the street overnight. Our condo, with its single dead succulent on the 3rd-floor balcony, was a stain on her perfect record. And we, by daring to be in the hospital, were showing her blatant disrespect. The day it all came to a head, I was finally showing signs of improvement. They were talking about moving me to a regular room in a few days. Lena had gone home for a few hours to shower and get some real sleep in an actual bed. I was alone, drifting in and out of sleep, listening to the reassuring hum of the balloon pump. Then at 3:17 p.m. the hum stopped. The beeping stopped. The lights on the machines blinked once, twice, and then went dark. For a terrifying second there was absolute silence. Then a cacophony of alarms from every room in the ICU. Red emergency lights flickered on, casting the unit in an eerie glow. Nurses and doctors sprinted into action. Someone was at my bedside immediately, manually checking my vitals, attaching a portable oxygen tank. "What happened?" I croaked. "We're on backup generators, Mr. Chen," the nurse said, her voice calm but her eyes wide. "But there's a problem. The main power is out, but the secondary grid transfer switch isn't engaging. We're running on battery power for the critical systems, but we have maybe 20 minutes. A doctor appeared in the doorway. "It's not a city-wide outage. It's just us. They're saying someone from the utility company deliberately cut the feed to the hospital." The ICU became a controlled chaos. They started the process of manually ventilating patients. A crash cart was parked outside my door. 20 minutes. That's all the time we had. 25 minutes later, just as the batteries were beginning to die, a deep, rumbling growl echoed from outside. It grew louder and louder until it was a constant vibration through the windows. Looking out from my bed I could see the street below. A convoy of 4 massive, semi-truck-sized diesel generators was pulling into the hospital's ambulance bay. They were yellow, monstrous, and beautiful. Within minutes, heavy-gauge cables were being run up the service elevators. A team of utility workers in hard hats moved with practiced efficiency. 15 minutes after the first truck arrived, the lights flickered back on. The machines beeped back to life. The balloon pump next to my bed hummed its reassuring tune again. I have never been so happy to hear a machine in my entire life. I learned the full story later from a very apologetic hospital administrator and a furious detective from the LAPD. A utility worker, making a routine check, had found the main power line to the hospital's dedicated substation had been physically cut. Not an accident. Sabotage. The cut was clean, deliberate. Security footage from the alley behind the substation showed a single figure in a high-visibility vest and hard hat approaching the box, doing something for a few minutes and then walking away. The disguise was a good one, but it wasn't good enough to hide the walk, the mannerisms, or the car. It was a silver Mercedes with a Vista del Sol HOA board member parking sticker on the windshield. The car was registered to Patricia Winthrop. When the police arrived at her immaculate beige house in Vista del Sol, Patricia answered the door in a silk robe, a glass of white wine in her hand. She seemed confused, then indignant. "Cut the power to the hospital?" she scoffed. "That's absurd. I was here all afternoon. I have no idea what you're talking about." But the evidence was overwhelming. The disguise was found in her garage. The bolt cutters were in her trunk. Her fingerprints were on the cut power line. Her phone's GPS placed her at the substation at the exact time of the sabotage. Why did she do it? The police interrogation later revealed her twisted, monstrous logic. She hadn't come to kill me. In her mind, she was simply applying pressure. "You don't understand," she told the detective, her voice shaking with a bizarre sense of righteousness. "They've been ignoring HOA communications for weeks. They're in flagrant violation. The fines are mounting. I thought if I could just get their attention, force them to deal with the plant." I knew the hospital had generators. I read about it in their emergency preparedness plan. I just wanted to cause a disruption, a temporary inconvenience so they'd have to call me, have to negotiate. I didn't think they'd let the patients die. The hospital is supposed to have backups. It's their fault for not being prepared. She thought she was being clever. She thought she was teaching us a lesson. She didn't realize that tampering with critical infrastructure, especially for a hospital, is a federal offense. The next morning, while Patricia was being booked on charges of attempted murder, terrorism, and a host of other federal crimes, a new sound filled the quiet, manicured streets of Vista del Sol. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The same 4 massive diesel generator trucks that had saved my life rolled slowly down Patricia Street. They weren't there to provide power this time. They were there as part of the evidence seizure. But the sight of them was enough. Neighbors came out of their houses, coffee mugs in hand, staring in disbelief as the convoy came to a halt, completely blocking the street in front of Patricia Winthrop's pristine home. They idled there, their engines rumbling, a constant, deafening reminder of what she had done. Patricia, who had been released on bail pending her trial, was standing in her front yard, screaming at the utility workers. Her helmet hair was a mess. Her face was purple with rage. "You can't park those here. This is a quiet residential neighborhood. There are HOA rules about commercial vehicles. I'm the president. I'll have you all towed." One of the workers, a large man named Gus with a thick gray mustache, just smiled and took a long sip from his thermos. "Ma'am, we're here on orders from the U.S. Marshals Service. You got a problem with that, you take it up with them. We'll be here for a while." The neighbors, many of whom had suffered under Patricia's tyranny for years, began to laugh. They applauded. Someone brought Gus a plate of cookies. Patricia Winthrop stood frozen on her perfect lawn, trapped between the rumbling behemoths. Her kingdom, built on a foundation of petty rules and absolute control, had crumbled in an instant. She was no longer the queen. She was a punchline. A cautionary tale. The HOA Karen who tried to kill a man over a dead plant and got run over by karma in the form of a diesel-powered semi-truck. It took me 6 months to fully recover. The doctors said the stress from the incident set my recovery back considerably, but I was alive. Patricia's actions had nearly killed me, but in a twisted way, the public outrage over the case ensured I got the best follow-up care imaginable. A GoFundMe started by a nurse at the hospital paid for a year of in-home physical therapy. Today I'm back teaching history. I stand in front of a classroom of sleepy teenagers and tell them about the fall of empires, about how power corrupts, and about the importance of civic engagement. Sometimes I tell them the story of Patricia Winthrop, the petty tyrant of Vista del Sol. I live in the same condo. And on my balcony, in a beautiful new ceramic pot, sits a thriving, healthy succulent. It's a small act of defiance. A symbol of survival. Patricia Winthrop is currently serving a 12-year sentence at a federal prison in Dublin, California. Last I heard, she tried to start a HOA in her prison unit to enforce rules about towel folding. It did not go well for her. As for me, I find a strange peace every evening when I step onto my balcony. In the distance, I can just make out the roof of the hospital where they put me back together. And on a clear day, I can almost hear the faint, phantom rumble of generators. It's the sound of justice. And it's the best sound in the world.